like, and make sure to engage in comments and share this video to your friends and story lovers, and click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Inquisco for more real and true stories like this. The first time I met Rohan, he was standing on my porch, toolbox in hand, his gaze scanning the warped wood of the banister. It had been loose for weeks, and Greg, my husband, kept saying he'd fix it but never did. One morning, I decided I'd had enough of stepping over the creaky spot and called the number from the handyman flyer tucked into our mailbox. "Mrs. Lewis?" he asked, his voice low and tinged with an accent. "Yes," I replied, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. It was early spring, and the morning air still had a bite to it. He smiled politely and introduced himself. "I'm Rohan. You mentioned the banister in your message?" "Yes, right this way, ciao," I said, stepping aside so he could follow me to the porch. Up close, he was younger than I had expected, maybe mid-30s, with warm brown skin and sharp, thoughtful eyes. His black hair curled slightly at the ends, peeking out from beneath a faded baseball cap. He wore a plain gray t-shirt that clung to his lean frame and a pair of jeans that had seen their fair share of hard work. As he inspected the banister, I couldn't help but notice the way he moved, deliberate and confident, as though he had done this 1,000 times before. I hovered nearby, unsure if I should offer him something to drink or just leave him to it. "This won't take long," he said, straightening up. "The wood's in good shape, just needs a few reinforcements. I can get it done in about an hour." "That's great," I said, relieved. "Let me know if you need anything." He nodded, already pulling tools from his box, and I stepped back into the house. From the kitchen window, I watched him work, the rhythmic sound of his hammer breaking the morning stillness. There was something calming about his presence, the way he focused entirely on the task at hand. When he finished, he knocked on the door to let me know. "All set," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Should be sturdy now." I stepped onto the porch and tested it, pressing my weight against the repaired section. It didn't budge. "Perfect," I said, smiling. "Thank you so much." He nodded again, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Let me know if there's anything else you need." I didn't expect to see him again so soon, but a week later I noticed the garage door sticking. It was one of those little things that I could have ignored, but Rohan's number was still pinned to the fridge, and before I could think too much about it, I dialed. He came by the next day, and just like before, he worked quietly and efficiently. This time, I offered him a glass of iced tea, which he accepted with a polite thank you. "You're good at this," I said, as he sipped the drink, standing in the shade of the garage. "It's what I do," he replied simply, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. There was no reason for me to linger, but I found myself chatting with him as he packed up his tools. He had a way of listening that made me feel like my words mattered, like he wasn't just waiting for his turn to speak. When he left, the garage door glided open and shut with ease, but something else had shifted. I told myself it was just gratitude for a job well done, but the truth was harder to admit. A few weeks passed, and life carried on as usual. Greg was busy with work, the kids were wrapped up in school and their endless activities, and I found myself falling into the same routines. But every so often I would glance at the garage or the porch and think of Rohan. It wasn't long before another issue cropped up, this time the back deck. The boards near the steps were starting to warp, and I could hear them groan under my weight every time I carried out a basket of laundry or watered the flowers. I hesitated before calling him. It felt silly, almost excessive, to keep reaching out to the same person for these little fixes. But after standing on the deck and staring at the splintered wood for far too long, I gave in and dialed his number. He arrived the next afternoon, his truck rumbling down our quiet street. I was outside, kneeling by the flower beds, when he pulled into the driveway. "You're going to wear me out with all these projects," he teased lightly as he climbed out, his warm smile softening the words. "I'm keeping you busy," I replied, brushing dirt off my hands. "Always a good thing," he said, grabbing his toolbox. This time the repairs took longer. The boards were in worse shape than I had realized, and by late afternoon he was still working. I brought him a sandwich and a fresh glass of lemonade, and we ended up sitting together on the steps of the deck as he took a break. The conversation came easily, like it always did with him. He told me about his family back in India, how he'd come to the States for school and ended up staying when he fell in love with the work he was doing. I told him about my kids, how much they loved the backyard, and how I wanted it to be a safe place for them to play. "You're lucky," he said, after a while, his voice quiet. "You have a beautiful home, a family." I looked at him, surprised by the wistfulness in his tone. "It's not perfect," I admitted, "but I try." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over the yard. It was the kind of moment that felt like it should be shared, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if he felt it too. When he went back to work, I stayed outside, sitting in one of the patio chairs and watching as he moved with purpose, his hands steady and sure. There was something soothing about it, something that made the rest of the world feel a little less chaotic. By the time he finished, the sky had turned a deep shade of blue, and the first stars were starting to appear. He stood, brushing sawdust off his jeans, and turned to me. "All done," he said, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "Thank you," I said, standing as well. "You've been a lifesaver." "It's my job," he replied, but there was a softness in his tone that made me think he meant more than that. I walked him to his truck, the gravel crunching softly under our feet. When he turned to say goodbye, our eyes met, and for a moment, the air between us felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. "Take care," he said finally, his voice low. "You too," I replied, my heart pounding as I watched him drive away. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he had looked at me, the quiet intensity in his gaze, it lingered, wrapping around me like a thread I couldn't untangle. I told myself it was nothing, just a passing moment. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. A week later, the faucet in the upstairs bathroom began to leak. It wasn't urgent, just an occasional drip that I could have ignored, but I didn't. I called Rohan. He came by the following morning, his truck pulling into the driveway just as the kids left for school. Greg had already left for work, and the house was unusually quiet. I greeted him at the door, trying to ignore the way my heart raced at the sight of him. "This one should be simple," he said, with a smile as I led him upstairs. "Good," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "You've been here so much. I should put you on the payroll." He laughed softly, the sound warm and easy. I wouldn't complain. I hovered in the doorway as he worked, the sound of the wrench turning filling the silence. The bathroom was small, and the closeness of the space only heightened my awareness of him. His steady movements, the faint scent of sawdust and soap that seemed to cling to him. "Can you hand me that towel, Hunter Sonkintis?" he asked, breaking me out of my thoughts. I stepped closer, grabbing the towel from the counter and holding it out to him. Our fingers brushed, and the contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "Thanks," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. I nodded, stepping back quickly, my cheeks burning. "I'll just be downstairs," I mumbled, retreating before I did something I couldn't take back. I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window, but not really seeing anything. My mind raced, replaying the moment over and over. It was nothing, I told myself. Just an innocent touch, but the way my body reacted told a different story. When he came downstairs, his expression was unreadable. "All done," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Great," I replied, standing too quickly. "Let me grab my checkbook." "You don't have to," he said, stopping me. "This one's on me," I frowned. "You've done so much already. I can't let you—" "I insist," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Okay," I said reluctantly, my heart beating faster as I noticed the way he was looking at me. Steady, unflinching, like he could see every thought I was trying to hide. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us seemed to shrink, the silence heavy with unspoken words. I could feel the pull, the quiet magnetic force that had been building with every visit. "I should go," he said finally, his voice breaking the spell. "Yeah," I said softly, stepping back. He hesitated, his eyes lingering on me for just a moment longer before turning toward the door. I followed, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. As he stepped onto the porch, he paused. "If you ever need anything, you know how to reach me." "Of course," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I watched as he walked to his truck, the sun catching the curve of his jaw and the line of his shoulders. He climbed in, the engine roaring to life, but he didn't drive away right away. Instead, he looked back at the house, at me standing in the doorway. For a moment, I thought he might say something, might turn around and close the space between us. But then he shifted the truck into gear and pulled out of the driveway, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding and my mind racing with everything that had almost happened. When I stepped back inside, the house felt too quiet, too empty. I leaned against the door, my hands trembling as I tried to steady my breath. The intensity of the moment lingered, a reminder of how close we had come to crossing a line that could never be undone. It was a line that we hadn't crossed, I reminded myself. But as I stood there, the memory of his gaze and the warmth of his touch still vivid, I knew it was a line that would haunt me for a long time. Click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Inquisco for more real and true stories like this.